thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. Give thanks because he's given Jesus Christ, his Son. Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. Give thanks because he's given Jesus Christ, his Son. And now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. And now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. Give thanks. Open our eyes, Lord. We want to see Jesus, to reach out and touch him, to say that we love him. Open our ears, Lord, and help us to listen. Open our eyes, Lord. We want to see Jesus, to keep your lovely face ever before my eyes. This is my prayer. Make it my strong desire, that in my secret heart no other love competes, no rival throne survives, and I serve only you. Jesus, oh Jesus, come and fill your lambs. Jesus, oh Jesus, come and fill your lambs. And fill us tonight, Lord, through the abundance of your word, in Jesus' precious name. Amen, amen. Well, we come to the last 4 chapters, and as we would think, it's full of a bunch of numbers. And so we actually can go through it relatively quickly. And because, for example, chapter 33 here is sort of a journal of 40 years of traveling locations. And of course, we knew when we went through Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers that we didn't have all the information that was possible to get. We knew that we had the amount of information God wanted us to have at that time, right? So we knew that, they jumped from one location to another, or maybe there was a location or two in between the 2 locations they mentioned. And this is what we find in chapter 33. That was true. So in this chapter are 56 names, 42 places, and 18 of those 42 places, we have no idea where they were located. Most of them, we've never even seen their names before in the Bible until chapter 33. And so what it's doing, it's taking us from Egypt, and I have 4 different maps for you, so hopefully one of them will work. But we see over on your left, that's Egypt, and then traveling around and going across the the Red Sea. It sort of depends on which locations and stuff. We've talked about that. And you can take a look at those various things. Now, one thing I sent out in an email, if we don't have your email, please get it so we can get it. Right now we're having a little bit of problems. We did something wrong, and so they shut down our MailChimp app for a while. I don't know what we did wrong, but evidently we broke some rule. I don't know what it was. But anyway, so we're having to email them out. So if you don't have your email, make sure you get it to Jenny. But this particular website, this guy is a genius. What he did here is he went through all the locations that we will find here today, starting back in Egypt. And then if you click on it, it takes you to the Google map of today. And then you can zoom in on it. So if you want to know exactly where Ramesses is today in Egypt, it'll actually take you to today's location, and then you can actually see it. Is that what you're doing there? Is that Ramesses there? It could be. Yeah. So I got lost in it, and I was like an hour and okay, I got to get stuff done here. But it was very enlightening. But again, it would take a few hours if you really read it all and then clicked on each of those locations. It's on the email. It's on the email that we sent out to everybody. If your email has been given to Jenny. Yeah, all that stuff is on the email. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just started doing that towards the end. I wish I had done it earlier on, but for a long time it did go out in the email, but you didn't get it here in print because it didn't really help you in print here. But yes. On all the emails, it has all the pictures that I put up. That might be what we did illegally. I don't know. But, and then also some videos that we hooked up from YouTube and looked at different things. They're all on, and I have all of those in my archives as well. And I do get asked from time to time, people going, hey, can you send me those notes? I'm like, I'd love to. Here you go. Well, so we come to verse 1 and 2 here. And again, I'm going to be going through this rather quickly, so when I tell you that I'm jumping forward, I'll let you know. But these are the journeys of the children of Israel who went out of the land of Egypt by the armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. Now Moses wrote down the starting points of their journey at the command of the Lord. And these are the journeys according to their starting points. Now what we discover is the Lord led Moses to also write Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, except for the little end at the part where Joshua says Moses died. And so now we discover that God also didn't tell us till now that he had Moses keep a journal of all the specific locations along the way. So I guess maybe there was a map of some type that he drew in. And again, these are key points along the way that tells us that our Bible is a historical document. If somebody tries to say, well, the Bible's a religious document, I'd say, no, I don't like that. Because that means you can interpret it how you feel spiritually. No, the Bible is history. It's his story, God's story. And this is history. And there's so many details in the Bible. I mean, literally, if God wanted to make a mythical book, he shouldn't give all these specific details of locations and peoples and how many horses they had in the battle and how many chariots and how many people died. And so we have today so many hundreds of locations, types of money, types of dress. All these things have been uncovering over and over again. Archaeological finds still happening. But we find that there was a historical document. Some of it we can trace back today. Some of it we can't. It was thousands of years back. It's amazing that we can find most of them. Well, in verse 3 here, they departed from Ramesses, that's in Egypt, a specific location, on the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, and on the day after Passover. You guys remember this. They had Passover that evening, and then they left. And they went out with boldness in the sight of all the Egyptians. Remember, they went out and they asked the Egyptians to give them their gold or whatever valuables, and they gave it to them. They left boldly. They didn't sneak out or run away scared. For the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn. As they're leaving and walking and got their carts and their animals, their funerals happening all around them as they're leaving. They're just like, get out of here. Whom the Lord had killed among them, and also on their gods, small g, the Lord had executed judgments. Remember, the 10 plagues were all taking a god, one of the many gods of Egypt, their main gods, and basically showing them that they're nothing compared to the real and living God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we start here in verse 5 where it gets going. They moved from Ramses and then they camped in Sukkoth. Remember that word that's one of the feasts of Israel, right? The Feast of Booths. So this was their first time of having to realize we're living in tents. When they did live in Egypt, I think they did live in houses of some type, shacks, I don't know. But here now, for the first time, they're camping. They'd never done this before. So there was an adjustment period, we learn, and this has taken us back to Exodus chapter 12 through 16. And then they departed from Sukkoth and camped in Etham, at the edge of the wilderness, and then they moved from Etham and turned back to Pi-Arihoth, which is east of Bel-Zaphron, and camped near Migdol. It's interesting that some of these places we know back in the life of Abraham, who was not too far from Pi-Arihoth at one point. Well, in verse 8, they departed from before Ahiroth and passed through the midst of the sea into the wilderness. So they crossed the Red Sea. And they moved from and they were there 3 days in Ethram, and they camped in Marah. Remember what it was called Marah? They didn't have any water, right? And God turned the poisonous water they did find by throwing a tree into it, turned the water sweet. And so they saw the first of many miracles in this wilderness experience. And they came from Elam, 12 springs of water, 70 palm trees, so they camped there. And they moved from Elam, and they camped by the Red Sea. So in verse 11 through 17, we see that they went from the Red Sea to the wilderness of Sin, S-I-N, and then they went to another location from there, Tophakah, which we don't know, haven't heard of it, first time it comes up, as well as Ulash. And then Rephidim, we do know that place. That's in verse 14. That's familiar to us. And then they camped in the wilderness of Sinai. Remember, they were there for well over a year. And so then it doesn't show time periods here in this. It's just giving movements. It's just going through the map before they wandered around. Why is it important what happened in these various locations? Nothing of note took place. Nothing fruitful took place. We saw a few chapters ago, it mentioned, hey, more details are in the book of wars that happened while they were in the wilderness. And we're like, book of wars? Yeah, there was another book some other Israelite kept, not probably from God, not an anointed word, but nevertheless a historical document. I'm sure there was a lot of people that kept journals that could write. And in the book of wars, there's many different battles they had along the way. Skirmishes with people, which again, we don't have in the written word. We'll have to wait till we can watch the video presentation in heaven together. And then it goes on down and tells them they ended up at Hazaroth. And then from verse 18 all the way to verse 35 are all these new names they went through that we had no knowledge of. And again, how long they were there and how much they passed through there, we don't know. But many, many different locations. And it's interesting that one of them is verse 27, they camped at Terah, which, remember, that was Abraham's dad's name. They named one place after his brother who had died, Haran, but then it's very possible that Abraham had named a place after his father, Terah, and they had bumped by there. And then it's picking up in verse 46, or 36 again, the wilderness of Sin, Z-I-N, which is at Kadesh. Now, we knew all about the wilderness of Sin repeatedly, but from this point forward in the Bible, Deuteronomy and so forth, it won't be called that as much as it will be called Kadesh or Kadesh Barnea. And this is the place they set up when they first sent the 12 spies in, and they went from north and south, east and west. They covered the whole promised land, but they came back there. And that's where God said, nope, you're going to die in the wilderness. So basically, they're going to go around for 38 more years and come back and repeat Kadesh Barnea. They'll come back. And from Kadesh, they camped out Mount Hor. Remember what that was? That was in the land of Edom, where Aaron would be buried, the high priest, Moses' brother. And at the command of the Lord, and there, Aaron the priest at Mount Hor commanded the Lord, and he died there the 40th year after the children of Israel. So it also happened to be the 40th anniversary of leaving Egypt that he died on the first day of the 5th month. Aaron was 123 years old, which, when I was a kid, just sounded astronomical. Today, I don't know, there's people living into the hundreds. It's interesting. A while back on 60 Minutes, they had a guy saying that most of the people alive now will live past 100, and most of the people under the age of 40 will probably live between 110 and 130. So that's interesting. And of course, Bill Gates said, not if I can do something about that. We're going to get bumped off YouTube again. Okay. And then in verse 40, King Harad, the Canaanite, who was in the south, and he heard that they were in the land of Canaan. They weren't quite yet, but they heard they were. They heard of the coming, and so Israel departed from Hor and camped out a place we'd never heard of before, Zalmanoah. And then again, in verse 42, all the way to verse 46, there's places, some of them we know, some of them we don't. But in verse 47, they moved from this place you never heard of before, Almon Dablathaim, and camped in the mountains of Abarim. We know that one. Abarim, we know that, before Nebo. Ultimately, that's where Moses is going to die. And they departed from the mountains of Abarim and camped in the plains of Moab. This is where all the last part of Numbers we've been in. They were in the plains of Noah by the Jordan River across from Jericho. And as we go into Joshua, finally, that's their first battle, right? The Battle of Jericho. And so they camped there by the Jordan from Beth Hasamoth as far as the Abel Acacia Grove in the plains of Moab. So it's in that area there. They're sort of winding around by the Dead Sea, and then they go on up a little bit, and then they go further up almost to equal to the Sea of Galilee, and then they come back down, and so there's just a wandering around in that area of Edom, Moab, and Ammon. They're just sort of in that area. And in verse 50 to 53, now the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you have crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan. I'm glad he said it and didn't say if, but when. Then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you, destroy all their engraved stones, destroy all their molten images, demolish all their high places, and you shall dispose the inhabitants of the land and dwell in it. Listen to this, for I have given you the land to possess. So God is saying, when you get in there, remember, this is the nation where God's going to say, because of their pagan ways, them offering their babies to demons, as described in Psalms 106, and all these pagan, probably bestiality, and just many hideous demonic practices, God said, I'm vomiting them out of the land. And they were lived there, and God says, leave them there 400 years. They were there 430 years to be able to repent, but they didn't. But the people that did repent along the way, like the Rahabs and the Ruths and the so forth, we'll see, they got to stay in the land and they got to be a part of Israel and they prospered. So there were Gentiles along the way. We'll find out. There are many groups of Gentiles that were blessed by God to be in the land. But not these people. God, this was his precious land, and he has given it to the land of Israel to possess. So today, we are back at a point where people are saying, whose land is it? All those poor Palestinians getting kicked out of their own land. Guys, you can't believe the media, okay? There's absolutely no truth in this. And when you go back in the 1800s and then all the way up into 1948, when Israel did establish himself as a nation, there were no Palestinians. This was a name made up, interesting, after the destruction of 70 AD. Titus, who destroyed Jerusalem, who hated the Jews and scattered the Jews to the four corners of the world, he's the first one who called it Phistilia. And it was a name saying they were the Philistine people. And this other name it was really established in the 60s. And they are a potpourri group of people, but you got to realize that Israel is not a big country, just a few million, but almost half of them in Israel proper are Palestinians. They live side by side. They have ID cards. They have businesses. They vote. At the Knesset, many of the politicians are Palestinians. Okay? So this idea that they are trying to genocide the Palestinians or hate Palestinians, no. It is those Palestinians that hate the Jews, which not all Palestinians do. I had some Jordanians and Palestinians in my church in San Diego, and one of them was one of my main elders. I had him speak when I wasn't there, and he was born to hate the Jews. And we always had a big menorah on the table back because like Chuck did, loved Israel. And the first time they saw that, they just about had a seizure. But then as they said and learned the Bible, they also loved the Jews now, even though they hated them. One of them was from Bethlehem, and his mom, she was born a Christian, but just could not worship Jesus because she just hated the Jews so much. And she knew Jesus was a Jew. But the dad was a beautiful, beautiful Christian man, just loved the Lord. He was a nurse, but he horribly got persecuted because he was not Muslim. So understand, the first time I went to the area of Bethlehem and on down, everybody was Christian. There was a very small percent of Muslims there. And then when the Muslims began to pump in money and take over and build schools and colleges, they basically said, if you want to eat, you want to buy, you want to have a job, you got to become a Muslim. And now, and so a lot of the people are forced to be Muslim that don't want to. And of course, none of them are a part of the Hezbollah or the Hamas or all of the different things that have been there to hate the Jews. So let's understand this. The earth is the Lord's and all that's in. All the gold, all the silver, all the cattle on the hills are God's. Okay? So it's his game, his bat, his ball. He made up the rules. If you don't like it, go live on your own planet. Oh, you can't? Well, you better submit to the God that did made this one in. It's all his. And the God who owns all things, he is the maker, the creator, and the owner of all things, says, I'm giving this tiny, tiny little dot to Israel. Today there's 22 Muslim nations surrounding Israel. Somebody pointed out, if you were to say the amount of space that the Muslim nations have compared to Israel, you would look at a football field and say, okay, that's all the Muslim nations, and Israel has 1 square foot. So imagine picking out 1 square foot. That's how much land compared to the Muslims that they have. And Israel doesn't have very much. It is tiny. It's the size of Rhode Island. It's smaller. As a matter of fact, if you were to go from Camp Pendleton here to Tijuana, Mexico, and from the ocean to Big Bear Lake, that's the size of Israel. And it's still too big for the Muslims, for them to have that. And so God gave him this dot. Is there something wrong about God giving a piece of land to any people? He owns it all. He can do what he wants, when he wants, how he wants. And who owns the land? God's made this clear to Israel. In Leviticus 25, verse 23, remember, he says, the land shall not be sold permanently when you get into the promised land, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me. So really, it's just on loan. It really hasn't been officially given to God. Jesus, why is that holy then? Because God says that's the place I'm going to put my name. And Israel will never see their full promised land until Jesus brings them into it. But I just want to make it clear here that he says, for I have given it to you, the land to possess. Now, just because evil men have conquered them, evil men have kicked them out, all by the hand of God and his planning to draw in the end times, it would be one of the markers that we would know that we are in the latter days when all the four corners of the earth, the Jews would come back from the diaspora, all over the four corners of the earth, they would come back into Israel. And you go to Israel, every nationality is represented there. You've got some very black Ethiopian Jews. Blows people's mind. They see these big, tall, beautiful, slim black people with machine guns that are in the military. They are Jews. They've been Jews since the 80s. They go back, all the way back into history to the times of Solomon. We bought our first building in San Diego from a Spanish-speaking Jewish congregation. There's a lot of Jews in Mexico, speak Spanish. John Bonner goes there at least once a year or more to evangelize all the Jews. He does songs and worship and tracts in Spanish, and he has no problems finding all kinds of Spanish-speaking Latinos. And then you got the Russians and the Germans, and it's an amazing thing that God said when you see them start getting brought back into the land. He said to Ezekiel in chapter 37, look down there in that valley. What do you see? I see a bunch of dry bones. Can those bones live again? And Ezekiel said, Lord, you know, not me. I know this isn't possible with man, but it's possible with you, yes. He goes, those bones shall live again. And that's what we're seeing now. And it said that Israel would bloom as a rose. It's amazing how much, I think it's 30% of Europe's fruits come from Israel. 80% of their flowers come from Israel. It's insane, that little bit of land producing so very, very much. And so he says, it's mine as all the earth is the Lord's, but you are to sojourn. That's where I want you. And eventually in you, all the nations of the world would be blessed. And in you, that my name will dwell there with you one day. And so the spirit of this age is to be mad at Israel, to hate Israel, to cut Israel off. And I have seen in these last handful of years that divide grow. I mean, some strong conservative Christians hating on Israel. A lot of Christians have become Catholics, which blows my mind. And of course, Catholics, it's like almost one of their number one things is to hate Israel. They have always been anti-Semitic and done horrible things to Israel. And then, of course, almost all denominations, there's a very tiny percent of Christians that believe that Israel is still God's chosen people. Romans 9:10-11. Most believe in the replacement theory, where God's replaced Israel, or the Christians, with Israel. Not true. And it stands. Genesis is like the foundation of the root of the nature of this world. And it says, whoever blesses Israel will be blessed, whoever curses Israel will be cursed. And, you see this with England, and now they horribly persecuted the Jews up until they finally left in the 40s, but after World War II. But they've continually done things that have cursed them, constantly ruling in the Arabs' favor to hurt Israel since that time. And now, even to this day, Stammer of all of them has put down his foot. The prime minister said, yeah, absolutely, there's a Palestinian state. And, if Netanyahu comes into Europe, we're going to arrest him for war crimes and, wars against humanity. And again, I think that weak Christians that are grounded in the word, will get caught up with the spirit of this age. And friends, I'd say, do not curse Israel. So for years, they said, we're moving our United States embassy to Jerusalem, where it should have been all along. They wouldn't do it. Every president, I'll do it. And finally, Trump did it. And boy, all hell broke loose against him. Why do I think Trump was blessed and reelected, and why are we in a season of blessing and will continue to be so? I believe because of our stance for Israel. I really believe it's one of the biggest blessings. Interesting, not a Christian, but Benjamin Franklin. A short time he considered himself a Christian, but he said, reading the Bible, I realized that every person must reap what they sow, and every nation must reap what it sows. Now, as for man, God doesn't have to do that because he has all of eternity to do that with him. Those who have been righteous can be blessed in the next life. Those who have been wicked can be cursed, punished in the next life. But he said nations aren't going to be in the hereafter. So it's incumbent upon God to just or curse the nation in that generation or the following for the evils that it has done. And this is what I believe we are going to see, that a president and he gets a group of guys around him that blesses Israel will be blessed. And I understand sometimes Jews are very hard to love. They are. That's why the Bible didn't say you have to love them. It just said, don't curse them, bless them. But they do things. I mean, I've been to Israel, and I can tell you the Jews they're not saved, and they act like non-Christians, and they do things that try to persecute Christians. Not so much us, but typically the Catholics and the Episcopals and the Lutherans and all those who have hurt them so much, and still do things that hurt them, from the Vatican and so forth, to curse Israel to this day. But the point is that, look at it. He says in Romans, you are the wild branch that God grafted in. And if he could get the wild branch to grow, he can easily take the original branch and put it back in. So you, Gentiles, don't be haughty, but be aware that God is going to bless Israel throughout eternity, forever. They're his nation, and it's forever. And so again here, I just restate, don't listen to what these guys are saying. And I know a lot of these young people in their 30s and their 40s, they're trying to figure out things in life, and they're going back and forth, especially on supporting Israel, and they're playing with fire. But yet you're strong, steady people that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, they're standing strong. They're like, they know Israel doesn't do everything that's wonderful, but we do not curse them. We bless them. Well, in verse 54, You shall divide the land, the lot of the inheritance among your families. To the large, you shall give a large inheritance. To the small, give a smaller inheritance. To everyone an inheritance shall be whatever falls to him by lot. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. So they're going to get a boundary inside the land and say, okay, this is the area for whoever. Dan. So how do you then break it up into families? He says you do it by lot. Okay, drawing straws, or I don't know. But you think of the wisdom in this. Because if somebody was saying, okay, I'm giving you that land and that, somebody's going to say, oh, I'm jealous. He's got a nicer river than I do. He's got a better pond than his. I don't have a pond on mine. He's got a lot of trees. He's got the forest. I didn't get that. Why did you give it to him, not me? You know what I'm saying? There would have been that. But in essence, because it's by lot, and we learn in Proverbs, the lot falls by the hand of the Lord. He's saying, you didn't give me that property. God did. You know, we got an area, but then it was purely in the hands of God, whether I got that piece of land or that piece of land. And so they could not be envious or bitter or angry at the leaders of their tribe because it was in the hands of God. Well, verse 55 and 56. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, and it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land where you will dwell. More of it shall be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them. So God is saying, I'm a just God, and what I hate, I hate. What I love. And if I hated them worshiping Baal, I'm going to hate even more you, my kids, worshiping Baal. If I vomited them out of the land because they're offering their babies as sacrifices, what more am I going to do to you for offering your babies as sacrifices? So he makes it abundantly clear to them that I'm a just and fair God. And I'm telling you now, if you don't effortlessly tear down the idols, if you don't rip up those places of worship, if you don't destroy the various emblems and ideas, and we'll see as we go on in Deuteronomy and Joshua that God's going to say, if you don't do it, you're going to be curious. You're going to go, wow, why are those stones laid there? Oh, that's where they worship the Asherahs. Oh, well, why did they lay that stone that way? And what's this here? I dug this thing up over here. What's this middle thing mean? He says, that will lead you into idolatry, just being inquisitive. And we're going to do that more. But at the very end of Joshua, they're into the land. They've been in the land for a while. In chapter 23, verse 13, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations from before you, but they shall be snares and traps to you and scourges on your sides and thorns in your eyes until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you. So they get into the land, everything God just said in that verse 55 and 56, they completely ignored. They didn't tear it down. They got some land and they are satisfied. The population we have and the amount of the property God gave us, the boundaries, we have enough. And I don't want to have to go over the hill and fight another battle. I don't want to climb over that field and fight it against another group of Canaanites. I just want to sit for a while, kick my feet up and enjoy. And Joshua said, you've got to finish the job. They got to get them outside the boundaries, but they didn't do it. Well, now we come to chapter 34, and here are the borders that would be of Israel. Now, I will just simply say to you, this is the chapter 34 boundaries here. They're not exact, you know. I know when I was remodeling my house in San Diego, and I was going to build a new fence, that one of the neighbors said, hey, that last guy, he built way on your property and you should, move it. And I was like, well, I'm going to build a fence. I don't want to cheat my neighbor either. So I got a guy out and man, they found a post that literally was placed there in 1920, way under the dirt. They came and they found it and we dug it up and sure enough, yeah, the fence was a little encroached on my property, not much. And I had my neighbor come out and we measured it and we did it together. And because the Bible in Proverbs just says, do not move The boundary lines, if you don't want to be cursed by God, they're of the Lord. Don't mess with them. And so that wasn't the case here. It's like, really? Where it goes that way and then that way? And yeah, it's not a super specific. But also, if you go back and look at what God said to Abraham, it was every place the moment you left Mesopotamia, all the way to the promised land. So many people say that the promised land should go all the way to Iraq, okay, and come around that way. And so you can find some other maps. And so it really depends on how you would look at it. But this is what we find here. And these are where the various tribes landed. Well, verse 1 and 2 here. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land of Canaan, this is the land that I shall fall to you as an inheritance, of the land of Canaan in the boundaries. And I would like to just say that within God's nature, he has done this in his own heart and his mind, whether he spoke it to everyone or not, that God has done this. He knows every hair on our head. He knows every word we speak before we speak it. He's hedged us in behind and before. In Acts 17, a great part of Paul's sermon, he says here in verse 26, and he, God, has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth. Hey, black, Asian, Indian, whatever you are, we all come from Adam and Eve, right? We all go back. We're brothers and sisters back in the day somewhere. And has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. So not only individual people, but nations. God has pre-appointed boundaries and a time for them to exist. It's interesting as we go through the Bible, we see Egypt is still around at the very, very end. Sure enough, today you can find Egyptian passports. But you keep going, and you look at other giant nations, the Babylonian nation, the Syrian nation. And God says you're going to be stomped out permanently. And today you won't find a Babylonian passport. You will in the tribulation period, though, I think. But God has it set up, those boundaries. So we should just be in awe. I know I'm often just in awe that I was born in America. And it breaks my heart when I see people in the conditions they are in India, in China. You know, they show you all the new progress in China, but most of the people are suffering immensely in hardship and poverty and mistreatment. North Korea, man, born in the middle of India back in the 1700s. Man, we are blessed. You know what? We of all people on this planet and this sphere of time, we live like kings. We live better than King Solomon probably ever did. There's just the ease of our life. Well, I will get off that soapbox. Here we are, verse 3-5 here. Your southern border shall be the wilderness of Zin, according to the border of Edom. And then your southern border shall extend eastward to the end of the Salt Sea. So you can see the Salt Sea there to the east, and then Mediterranean is on the west. And then we're heading in the south is down towards Egypt on the bottom, and then north is way up towards Syria and Lebanon. And then all along the west today is the country of Jordan, but it used to be Edom, Moab, and Ammon at this time period. Your border shall turn from the south side of the ascent of Akrabim. That sounds like a weird name, but we're going to see it again in Joshua and in Judges. We're going to see that ascent at Akrabim. And then continue to Zin, and to be on the south, Kadesh Barnea. Then it shall go to Hazarah, Adar, continue as Asmon, and the border shall turn from Asmon of the brook of Egypt, and it shall end at the sea. Then the western border is the Great Sea, the Mediterranean Sea. Beautiful, beautiful ocean there. And that'll be your western border. And then in verse 7 through 9, we see the northern border. From the great sea, you shall mark out your border to Mount Hor. So you start at the Mediterranean and begin going in east. From Mount Hor, you shall mark out your border in the entrance of Hamath. Remember back the time of Abraham in the area of Hamath today, they got the oldest gate in the world. And it's barely hanging on it, and it dates back to the time of Abraham. And the direction of the border shall be towards Zedad, and the border shall proceed to Zephon and shall end at Hazar. And this will be the northern border up in the Hula Valley today. Quite a story up there. And then in verse 10 through 12, we have the eastern border. And I'm not going to read that, but we know the eastern border along the Jordan River there, as we've talked about. The border, verse 12, shall down along the Jordan, and it shall end at the Dead Sea, and shall be your land with the surrounding boundaries. And then in verse 13 to 15, so 9.5 of the tribes are going to actually possess the promised land. Remember why? Because Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh said we're staying on the east side, not God's will. So he's saying this only applies to part of you. So Moses commanded the children of Israel, saying, the land which you shall inherit by lot, which the Lord commanded to give to the 9 tribes and a half tribe. Verse 14 to 15 here. Then the children of Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh, they've already received their inheritance. It's there across from Jericho eastward. Nothing more to be said about that. It wouldn't last long. First to be compromised, first to be paganized, first to be attacked, first to be destroyed off the face of the earth. Verse 16 to 17, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, these are the names of the men who shall divide the land among you as an inheritance. Eleazar the priest, and notice the passing of the baton here, Joshua the son of Nun. So not Moses, because Moses wouldn't be going to the promised land, right? But even now, Moses is being moved to the side, even though he's not dead yet. And Joshua is doing a job that he normally would have done. So now as we read through 18 to 29, we see each of the tribes, like the tribe of Judah would be Caleb, the tribe of Simeon would be Shemuel, tribe of Benjamin would be Elidad, the tribe of Dan would be Buki. There's a good name. You're looking for a name for your child or maybe your dog. Buki, yeah, there you go. The children of Manasseh, well, half of the tribe of Manasseh, right? Hananiel, the famous name that we'll see throughout the Bible. Children of Ephraim, so there's 2 tribes from Joseph, right? Ephraim and Manasseh. And so the second son of Joseph, Ephraim, was Kemuel. And then the children of Zebulun is Elisaphan. The children of Eleazar are Paltiel. Of Asherah is Alihud. The children of Naphtali is Padahi. And these are the ones of the Lord commanded to divide the inheritance among the children of Israel of the land of the Canaan. So they were to lead things in there, but then they were to make the lots and everybody choose a lot, and that's what they got. So chapter 35 is what we see the Levitical cities and the cities of refuge. Remember in Numbers 18:20, then the Lord said to Aaron, you shall have no inheritance in the land, nor shall you have any portion among them, for I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel. So they weren't one of the 12 tribes, so there's actually 13 tribes here, because Joseph got 2, and they minus Levi out. But they still have to have a place to live, to farm, to build a garden, to have their animals. People would bring them tithes, and some of the tithes the Levites would get would be animals, right? And would be feed and different things. So where are you going to put it? You have to have a place to put it. So practically, they have to have a location. So this is what we find out now. Yeah, God gave them a really cool location. And so in verse 1 through 3, the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, saying, command the children of Israel that they give the Levite cities to dwell in from the inheritance of the possessions. And you shall also give the Levites common land around the cities. They shall have the cities to dwell in, and their common land shall be for their cattle, for their herds, and for their animals. Now, when we say cities, We've excavated many of these places, and they were a very small town with a fortified walls. So they had their big walls around them, but they were not very big. We would say today more like a town. But again, he goes on to tell us, to explain to us where these would be. And just to let you know that we don't get the full information on this until we get over to Joshua chapter 20 and 21, and he gives us a lot more information on these things. But in verse 4 through 5, the common land outside the cities will give the Levites, shall extend from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits all around. So that's about 500 yards. So a football field is 100 yards, right? So that's a pretty good chunk of land, about 500 yards all the way around the city. It would be gardened, and there would be cattle and little sheds and things kept, and that would be the area of the Levites. Now it's interesting, as we go on, we're going to see it's on all four sides of the city. So it's neat that you're in the land of Israel, and no more than a half a day's journey away, you would hit one of these cities, and you would walk through it, but a long time walking through it, you would be walking through the land of the Levites, heading to the cities. Well, in verse 4 and 5, it continues on saying here that then 2,000 cubits, 3,000 feet, or 1,000 yards outside the city. So now we got a whole lot bigger from the walls and then from the measuring outside of the city. So the south side, 2,000 cubits, the west side, 2,000 cubits, the north side, 2,000 cubits. The city shall be in the middle, and they belong to them as common land for the cities. So they don't own it, but it is nobody else's use but theirs. And so in verse 6 through 8, he now gives the distribution. And he says, you'll be appoint 6 cities of refuge, for the manslayer may flee. And to these you shall add 42 cities. So 42 plus the 6 cities of refuge makes 48 cities in total that the Levites would oversee in the promised land. And again, when they got in there, the larger tribes would give them many, the smaller tribes would give them few, but all the cities of the Levites, in proportion to their inheritance, each receive. So they're to be sprinkled throughout the promised land. These cities where the Levites would have, but also 6 of them would be cities of refuge for the manslayer. Now you say, what is this? He's going to go on to explain this, but let me tell you, as we read the Old Testament, it's interesting that a lot of the times, the problems the people have, as we've already studied in Exodus, Leviticus, and even Numbers, are the things that God is trying to deal with. He's not making a law out of them. He's just saying they exist, and we need to find out a way to curb this. So the Bible goes on to say that God bent the branch as far as he could, but he couldn't bend it so far to break it, where the Jews would say, I'm out of here. So he allowed polygamy. He did not order polygamy. God wants us to be polygamy. No, God doesn't. That's why if you look at the laws, it would no longer exist. God wants slave. No, God says slavery exists, but he put such tight reins on it that the person who was the slave wanted to keep being a slave. He didn't want to quit being a slave. He likes it. Life was too good as a slave. So, and this is one of these things. In this culture, they had honor killings, as in many Arab countries today, but not in the same way. I don't know if they do it this way today, but when, let's say you and your best friend went out into the woods to chop wood and to bring home some wood, and you're chopping away, and you didn't pay attention, and the axe head flies off and hits your good friend right in the head, and it kills him. According to the culture of this day, not the Jewish culture, the entire Middle Eastern culture was, his family, in order to keep honor, has to kill you, even though it was an accident. And if they didn't kill you, or at least try to kill you, then they would lose honor and have to leave their town. because they're a disgrace. So what does this guy do who just accidentally killed his friend? He could run to a city of refuge. And when he got to the city of refuge, he was under protection. They could not kill him there. And as we go on to see, he was to remain there until the congregation, they had a trial. And this is where the Levites would basically be the civil judges also. So you say, oh, well, if we did things the way the Bible said, you know what? The Bible never encourages other nations besides Israel to do this. And it only encouraged Israel to do this while God was their king. And when they replaced God as their king for Saul the king, most of the laws that God told them to do with the Levites, they quit doing them because the king was now the judge. And those people that he set up in his cabinet and his generals were the judges. So it totally changed. But nevertheless, we see the heart and the mind of God that then this guy would get a fair trial. But if it was, there was negligent, he should have tightened that thing up. And matter of fact, they had warned him about being negligent and not tightening that axe head up. And maybe the mom screamed saying, hey, before you chop wood, make sure you change that head out. Or, get a new stock because that head's going to fall off. Then what would happen, it was an unintentional killing. He would have to live in the city of refuge until the high priest died. So if they just, like Joseph, this young guy, they just got in, it's like, oh boy, I will live here till I die, most likely. But you could be there one day and the high priest dies, and then you're free to go back to your place. So that's where we're headed. And so in verse 9 through 12, so the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall appoint cities to be cities of refuge for you. Then the manslayer who kills any person accidentally may flee there. They shall be cities of refuge for you and for the avenger. This word avenger is the word goel. Remember in Ruth, where Boaz becomes the goel, the nearest kin? This is the same word. So here it's translated to say, he's really not being the nearest of kin to save the family. He's here to be the nearest of kin because he's got to kill you or he loses face and his family loses face. He's got this job description that he really doesn't want. So they're probably like, hey, you're the guy. You're the closest friend. Go get him. So he's chasing after him to try to kill him before he gets to the city of refuge. And this guy's hiding behind rocks and trying to get to the city of refuge beforehand. And so they shall be in the cities of refuge from the avenger, and the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation in judgment. In Deuteronomy 19, we'll see this shortly here in Deuteronomy next. In verse 2 to 3, it says, you shall separate 3 cities for yourself in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God is giving you to possess. You shall prepare roads for yourself and divide into 3 parts the territories of your land, which the Lord your God is giving you to inherit it, and any manslayer shall flee there. So of the 6 cities of refuge, they're in 2 separate halves, and all the roads heading to these cities of refuge, the roads have to be kept up. They've got to be clear roads without debris, without holes, so they can know exactly where they're going to get to that city. And that is their responsibility. Now, he's going to explain to us why this whole concept is so important. So verse 13 and 14, again, we're going to see more cities in Joshua 20 and 21. We'll see more of this. But these cities of the Jordan, 3 cities shall appoint pointed out of Canaan, in verse 13 and 14. And then in verse 15, 6 cities shall be for the refuge of the children of Israel. When a person kills somebody accidentally, they may flee there. Now, if he strikes him with an iron implement that he dies, in verse 16 now, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. So if the guy does it purposely, he kills him, Or if it goes to the court and the congregation says, it wasn't accidental because they were yelling at each other and I heard the guy scream in the woods, I'm going to kill you. And so even though he's saying it was accidental, we don't think it was accidental. So if the guy lies in wait, premeditated murder in verse 16 to 21, going to the city of refuge will not help you. So don't bother trying. In verse 22 and 20 to 24, again, if he pushes him suddenly without enmity or throws anything at him without lying in wait, again, not premeditated, an accidental murder, he dies unintentionally, then he can go to the manslayer, or he can go to the city of refuge. And then it says in verse 25 that this guy will have to remain there. If he is found innocent, he still's got to remain there until the death of the high priest, even for an accidental murder. He cannot be set free until the high priest dies. And of course, we can look at the picture of that, can't we? When Jesus died, we were set free from those sins that we committed intentionally and the sins that we committed unintentionally. We've been forgiven by all of them. But if the avenger, he goes on to say, decides, hey, I'm tired of being in the city, I want to go for a little stroll, and he goes outside the boundaries of the city, and somebody sees him, then they can kill him. So you've got to remain within the city. And we'll see some interesting stories as we go on. Solomon does something similar to that, making a guy stay inside the city of Jerusalem, and he goes out and has him put to death. But then he also says in verse 29 to 30 that these things shall be a statute of judgment throughout the generations to all your dwellings. Whoever kills a person, the murder shall be put to death on the testimony of a witness. But one witness is not sufficient against a person for the death penalty. You have to have 2 to 3 witnesses. And in verse 31 to 32, no ransom. So it's like, well, you know what? We talked to the family, and my family gave them, $100 million, and they said they're not going to press charges. It's saying can't be done. It's not something that you can pay a ransom and be found innocent from. Why? Because in verse 33 to 34, he says, so you shall not pollute the land where you are, for the blood defiles the land, and no atonement can be made for the land. For the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it, therefore do not defile the land which you inhabit, in the midst of which I dwell, for the Lord dwells among the children of Israel. So he says this is a principle that's a part of the very fabric of the universe that God made. That if a person is intentionally murdered, nothing less than the blood of the murderer also being spilt will cause there to be a peace on planet Earth. It goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 9. In verse 6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. In Numbers 35:33 here, again he says the land shall be polluted. In Deuteronomy 19:10, lest the innocent blood be shed in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance, and thus the guilt of the bloodshed be upon you. So not just upon the person, by not putting to death the murderer, you're polluting the land. And you are bringing judgment of God against you for not correctly punishing the murderer. In Deuteronomy 21:9, so you shall put away the guilt of innocent blood among whom when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. So you'll pollute the land. This is not your decision. This is in the hands of God, and he has made this a principle on the death penalty. So you say, man, so you're Bryan, you're for the death penalty? I don't know. I am, because there has to be a punishment that fits the crime. There's just a lot of reasons. It's interesting because, I was in the prison for 4 years as a chaplain. I got to finish the sentence. My wife says, don't do that. Start with you were a chaplain and then you were in prison for 4 years as a chaplain. Yeah, I just like, but you see these guys, and sometimes they're in my Bible study and I'm teaching them, talking about the Lord, and then you find out what they've done, and you're like, whoa. But yet, they've been forgiven now, and they're being discipled, and they grow in the Lord. Some, when they get out, they're not great again. They go back in. But they seem to have a real sweet walk with the Lord when they're in prison. And then I know young people that have done things like murder. And do I want them to be put to death? No, not really. Do I want to even see them get out of prison? Yeah, I do. Even though they've done heinous things. So, again, it's just like when I lived in San Diego, it's by the border. I mean, a lot of the people that I knew, either they or their family members were illegal aliens, and I knew them well. I mean, I went to their quinceañeras and their birthday parties and all. So you say, are you against immigration? Are you against illegal immigration? Okay, if I was a civil worker, yeah, I would be against it. As a Christian, no, not so much. Having open borders, that's insane. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I mean, if you make me try to write on a dotted line what I believe, yeah, we should have legal process of coming to the country. But at the same time, I know people that have lived here 30 years. They're wonderful people, and they still, for whatever reason, haven't gotten their citizenship. And do I want to see them go back to nowhere? I mean, their whole family's here. No, I don't want to see that either. So again, the very first murder, Cain killed Abel. Did God put Cain to death? No, he made him a wonder on the earth. He could never put down roots. So when you go through Genesis, you see a few murders that God didn't judge as a murderer. What about Moses? He murdered a guy. He fled for his life. He didn't get the death penalty. And we can go on, can't we? And so again, I can say that for these people that were civil judges, God's giving them an order as their king, and that's what's supposed to be done. And I do believe where you don't have punishments of physical crime, you have more of that crime. And it needs to be done speedily, which we never do. That's a big part of the reason I'm against the death penalty. If you're going to put somebody to death, you give them a day, and then you put them to death. You don't have them in prison for decades. Well, anyway, in chapter 36, 13 verses. Why am I telling you that? Because we're in the book of Numbers. And you should know that. 36 chapters and 13 verses in the 36th chapter. And this is mostly almost all about going back to a story in Numbers 27. These 5 daughters whose dad Zelophehad had died, Mahlah, Noah, Olga, Milcah, a boy. Like, we're going to name this next one Noah. I don't care if it's a girl or not. It's like, okay, now you got a daughter named Noah. But anyway, they said, hey, this isn't right that we wouldn't get any land. We're out in the wilderness and we've done righteously and we're ready to go in. But because my dad didn't have any boys, we don't have a lot. And Moses went to the Lord, and the Lord said, you're right. They should get the land. So give them land, even though they're women. Well, now as they're going into the land, the guys that are going to divide up the land are there. And the guy from the half tribe of Manasseh, who's in charge of Manasseh, is starting to figure out the lot, who would get first, second, third choice or whatever. And then he realizes, now what if one of these girls, she has her own farm, and she marries somebody from a different tribe? And we go back to the husband is the owner of things. So now all of a sudden the tribe of Dan or the tribe of Simeon, they get part of our land for Manasseh. That's not right. Moses said, wait a minute, I got to go back to the Lord on this one. And he comes back and goes, you also are right. So, ladies, you can have the land if you marry somebody within your tribe. But if you marry somebody outside your tribe, then you lose your land. And this is what they came up with here in chapter 36. And so they did as the Lord commanded them. And so Mala, Tirzah, Holga, Milcah, and Noah, the daughters of Zophalad, they married their sons of their father's brothers. So they said, okay, that just took down the marriage pool quickly. I really fell in love with this guy with Simeon over there. He is so cute. Have you noticed the tribe of Simeon guys are really cute? But these guys of Manasseh, they're sort of a toss-up. I'll marry the uglier guy because he's from Manasseh. But, I really like the guy from Simeon, but I can't marry him because I want to keep my land. And so we come to the final verse of Numbers. Drum roll, please. Okay, these are the commandments and the judgments which the Lord commanded the children of Israel by the hand of Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. So chapter 1, verse 1, they were in Mount Sinai, and they were just getting started in the first day of the second month of the second year. And now at the end of Numbers, we come 38 years later, and we are back at Kadesh Barnea. And did you notice how in Exodus, how some of it repeated in Leviticus, and then it repeated again in Numbers? Guess what's going to happen in Deuteronomy? Deutero, second, to say it again. But it'll be so much better the second, third, fourth time. I think God's making a point here. He's trying to get stuff in our head, isn't he? Well, Lord, thank you again for your word.